Today. Just to start things off, though, they're already bringing food, so if everyone wants to go and just serve themselves now, and then after everyone's got at least their first plate of food, we'll go and serve the food. Okay? All right, so go ahead and get yourself some food.
I'll just leave this here. Or?
Sometimes a nice all this stuff. I just want to see your arms are most
You remember the perfect time we left the road exactly.
Yeah.
It was great. You planned it out, we didn't know.
I strategically faced my walk over here.
something like
It's just a fun day.
Out of the
That's just what I only want to see you all actually have to show me. Like
So we hope to get more of that kind of group as well.
So one thing I was about to tell you that I was, since I still have spare time, I'm wondering if you need any help. I probably have help you, but I will be volunteering, so don't worry about anything else. I will just need them. So if you need outsource work or something, I probably but it won't be large amount of things. Yeah. Generally, I do exercise. Yeah. So Python. I do Python at work. So Python in general. Django, I'm still learning. Yeah. So just Wi-Fi. Yeah. We need help. Right? No. Some of my time the occupies a lot of work. I won't be able to do large amount of work, but small amount of work. anything like that. Not having to plug into what you were doing. I know it's kind of hard. It's kind of hard. But I'm not formally involved, so there might be concerns for yeah. Okay, just FYI. More than happy to help. I know that's kind of also hard for you guys.
We'll have to keep it pretty quiet because audio is going to be a challenge. Next time we'll have it set up where we were hoping to tie into the audio of the room, which we weren't able to do this time around. Next time we will. So I'm going to ask our speakers to really exercise their voices today. We don't really have any major announcements for the group per se. We always do try and cross-promote and promote with another group called Hackernest. I don't even know where did they gather.
They're gathering at Google offices.
So
they keep changing.
Okay. Anyhow, they're doing it Monday. You can see that on Meetup.com. But today we've got two really great speakers. We're going to actually be trying to broadcast live on air on Google Hangouts. So this will be recorded and available on YouTube somewhere. Just look at the Meetup.com page. But with no further ado, I'll let you introduce your background and stuff, Robin. Robin Ward.
Okay, hello everybody. You might maybe go some tours. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Hi, I'm Robin Ward. You might know me as Evil Trout. I think I'm the only person in the JavaScript community who's represented by a cartoon fish. If you know someone else, please let me know who they are because I'd like to have some words with them. Does anybody know who this is? I heard someone say it. Stephen King. No, I actually don't like this mic thing. Do you guys hear me well if I talk like this loud? Say yes. Anyway, I want to read a quote from Stephen King because I think it's really interesting and applies to what I've been talking about. So, this is Stephen King from his memoir on writing, but the quote is actually about reading. He says, "We read to experience the mediocre and the outright rotten. Such experience helps us recognize those things when they begin to creep into our own work and steer clear of them. We also read in order to measure ourselves against the good and the great, to get a sense of all that can be done. And we read to experience different styles." Now this is where I think it gets really interesting. He goes on to say, when I read Ray Bradbury's again, I wrote like Ray Bradbury. Everything green and wondrous and seen through the lens smeared with grease of nostalgia. When I read James M. Cain, everything I wrote came out clipped and stripped and hard-boiled. When I read Lovecraft, my prose became luxurious and Byzantine. I wrote stories in my teenage years where all these styles merged, creating a hilarious kind of stew. This sort of stylistic blending is a necessary part of developing one's own style, but it doesn't occur in a vacuum. You have to read widely, constantly refining and redefining your own work as you do. So you might be wondering, well, what does this have to do with JavaScript? But I think there's actually a lot of parallels to what you just said with reading and how you absorb what you read, and how it affects how you learn, and how you end up programming. So this talk is actually about two things. It's about Discourse, which is the open source software that I work on. So does Meetup, and Michael here helps us out from time to time. How many of you have heard of Discourse before? A few, okay. But I'll tell you what it is. But it's also about Ember.js, which is a MVC JavaScript framework. But it's also about learning. And I think if I explain myself properly, that'll make total sense. So first I'll tell you a little about Discourse. So Discourse is 100% open source software. So when I talk about that, I talk about when I say forum software, I mean software that allows you to create paragraphs. So if you're used to using the internet, you often use like Twitter, and like these days things like Twitter and Facebook, where you write in these like micro-blogging formats, are really popular. And I think like with text messages and stuff like that, they become really popular. But it's an unfortunately poor way to communicate because you end up not being able to fully express yourself. So forum software is really about communicating in longer form in paragraphs. if you've ever had an argument on Twitter, you'll know that it's very difficult to do. But we actually encourage that kind of thing in our software. Some stats about it. It was started by Jeff Atwood and myself. You might know Jeff Atwood because he created the site Stack Overflow, which is a fantastic site for programmers. We launched it on GitHub a year ago with our third co-founder, Sam Safwan, and since then we brought on a few other excellent people. Our first year, it's been really great. We actually passed 10,000 stars on GitHub recently. Over 300 contributors. And actually, we were featured in GitHub's State of the Octoverse as one of the top 5 fastest growing open source projects. So we're pretty happy about that. But the first thing I want to talk to you about is structure. And in particular, I talked earlier about how I think paragraphs help structure thoughts perhaps better than microblogging, but this is really about programming. I'm going to take a step back and talk about failure first. Because I think a lot of people underestimate how much failure contributes to I showed that slide of Stack Overflow. I said, sorry, Jeff Atwood. I said, you know him from Stack Overflow, but I didn't mention all the other things he worked on that you've never heard of. And I think those contribute as much to your career as your successes. So a few years ago, I worked on a startup with some really talented individuals. I thought it was a pretty AAA team. And we had this really ambitious web application that we were trying to build. And we knew that from day one, we needed a lot of JavaScript to make it all work. Because we wanted like a flash interface. We wanted like when you clicked on things for them to like fade in and scroll around. And the way to do this at the time was to use jQuery. So what we did was this, and I hope this illustrates it, is we made a fat jQuery application. We used a lot of like jQuery effects for animations and for click handlers to get around browser compatibilities. We did what we thought were like best practices at the time. We used namespacing. We delineated variables with like $signs so you could tell which ones were selectors and which ones weren't. We always made sure that our event handlers were also namespaced and always tore down and put things up. But, like I said, it was a story of failure. It didn't really work out. Our code quickly became unmanageable, and it became very difficult to work with. There's a few problems with that approach. The first one is that we had mixed content in presentation. And I think you see this a lot in jQuery applications. You end up using like data star attributes. So if you had a row of links, you might have like with an action on each one, like delete, you'd say data ID equals 1. And then when you click delete, you pass that through. It's like a standard way of doing things. But what that actually means is that your content is strictly tied to its presentation. And the single source of truth, or the authoritative source of truth for that information is now the DOM. So you basically, I think this is kind of crazy. It means anytime you want to change something, you have to look in the way it's presented and then extract that. So like one way I like to illustrate how crazy I think this is, like if you've ever done game programming, it's something like, let's say you're doing a maze in Pac-Man. It'd be like looking in the graphics data if there's a wall there. Like that's ridiculous. You wouldn't do that. You want to separate that. You want to have your collision volumes and everything in the same place. The other problem that we had was with we had a lot of random coding patterns. And I chose this image here because I think it illustrates that like many of these colors are beautiful. And in fact, a lot of the coding patterns that our developers used were really good on their own, but together they didn't really jive. I think it's really important that on a team everybody is on the same page. Like I said, I thought we were good developers, and we ended up with one developer saying, well, this is how I structure a function that when you click on a link and this happens. And another one did it a slightly different way. We didn't really notice this at first. It took a really long time. And by the time we noticed it, it was like, well, which is the one way we do it? And should we go back and convert all those other ways? It also became really difficult to maintain. So as we started, we were getting a lot done really fast. Like we were getting like the animations in place, and it was really cool. And after a while, we noticed that it started taking a lot longer to get any features done. I mean, you'd expect that with any mature software project that you work on, that the more you do, the more difficult it gets. But it becomes exponentially slower, that's a problem. We also had like a lot of QA, and the QA was taking a lot longer. Management started to ask, like, well, why is this somewhat simple feature taking so much longer than that other simple feature that you did 2 weeks ago? This is the biggest problem of them all. It just wasn't fun. I can't really state like how important it is to have fun where you work if you have the opportunity. I know not everybody is fortunate enough like that. There's a lot of circumstances and stuff. But if something that you work on is actively unfun, that is a huge bummer to your productivity. It takes way longer to get things done. You don't like look forward to going into work. You want to be, if at all possible, you want to create a situation where you're excited to go in and like on the weekend you're like, oh, I can hardly wait to get around to that thing on Monday. This was the furthest point of that. So this was kind of humbling. I called it the great humbling because if we were such a great team, if we were like handpicked from a really important guy in the Ruby community in Toronto, how did we screw up so badly? And I think the main takeaway, like after thinking about it, I mean hindsight is 20/20 and all that, was that we weren't a special snowflake. I think that a lot of people think that their applications are a lot more unique than they actually are. In particular, I'm mostly talking about web applications, but I think this can apply to many other domains. But most applications are going to have links, they're going to have URLs, they're going to have interactions with the user and stuff like that. And what we were doing with all this custom jQuery was reinventing almost all that stuff from scratch. And that was, I think, a big mistake. To contrast, I've mostly been talking about our front side here, but our back end was written in Ruby on Rails. And we didn't have the same problems. That one code base was much more organized, and our JavaScript one wasn't. And it made me wonder, it's like, well, what is it about the Rails one, that is much more efficient? And I think it comes down to what I said before, which is structure. Rails imposes a structure on your application. It says, you are not a special snowflake. You are probably going to need an ORM. You're probably going to need a router. You're probably going to need controllers. You're probably going to need things to wire up your application. So we're going to give you this toolbox of all these commonly used tools. But we're also going to ensure that you use convention so that you know that what something is called and where it should go. You're not going to have different people on different teams jumping into weird places. So I thought what I took away here was the ultimate big win, the structure. Why couldn't our JavaScript code base be as structured as that? And that's why I'm finally getting around to Ember. So I found Ember when we started doing Discourse. It was originally called Sprout Core. At that time it was called Amber, now Ember. And what Ember tries to do is organize your JavaScript code as well as I think Rails does on the server side. If anybody here is scared of Rails or don't like it, you are not tied to Rails, even though Discourse is a Rails application on the back end. You don't have to use Rails with Ember, it works with anything. But it adopts similar philosophies. And this really appealed to me. I immediately saw the benefit of this, because I'm like, oh, in an Ember application, you know that the file should be called this. And if you call it that, it wires up automatically, and your file goes here. It works beautifully. This shouldn't come as a surprise, because core member of Ember is Yehuda Katz, who also worked on Rails, and he also worked on jQuery. So I think that he brings a lot of knowledge to the table. I'm not saying that he's responsible for everything, that there's a fantastic team that's involved in all those projects, but the one thing he told me that he took away from Rails was that convention and structure really makes a big difference to productivity. So if you work with any other JavaScript frameworks, here's a couple of big ones. You might be wondering, well, what does Ember do differently? Because all of these MVC frameworks exist to impose structure in one way or another. And the answer is, I think it's a subtle difference, but it's about the amount of structure that it imposes and the amount of configuration, convention over configuration that it gives you. So I also think that comes at a cost of complexity. And to illustrate that, does anyone have a wild guess of what these numbers can represent? No one has ever gotten this.
The number of lines it takes to write something.
That's pretty close. This is the amount of files you need in these various frameworks to output hello world. So, PHP, if you've ever used it, it's dead simple. You just index.php, echo hello world. Sinatra, the Ruby server-side framework that's designed to be very simple. It's, again, you make one Ruby file, you have a get action, hello world. Rails is 19. I mean, it's a bit of a troll. I'm not saying here that Rails is worse. I'm just saying that it's more complex. It's obvious that if you are a brand new developer, it's going to be harder for you to find out how that hello world works if you've never used Rails before. Rails is more complex. It demands more of you as a developer. This is a totally unscientific chart. Like almost everything I'm saying, but I strongly believe this to be true. I mean, I'd love to debate any of you guys afterwards where things fit. But I really do feel that as you introduce more complexity and more structure, more learning is required. So if you're using jQuery, it's really simple to just drop a selector in and get something done. Backbone is a little harder. Backbone, it could be called a micro framework or a library. It's only about 1,000 lines of code. You could read it in an afternoon. Angular is getting to the more complex side. The Angular side, you have to learn about directives and transclusion and templating and all this stuff. And then finally, I think on the other end, you have Ember. And Ember is larger in file size, but there's also a larger toolbox that gives you more to do. So if you're building an application in Ember, there is more learning required. I love this. This is what I send to my family members when they're like, "What is it you do all day?" I don't know. This is my job. Neil, were you the one who found this image? No. I love this image. So you might be thinking something like this, like the last slide, like maybe you're not selling it so well. Like, look, I get it. Like, everybody's busy. Everybody, like, there's only so much time you have in a day to learn things and get stuff done. And the last thing you might want to hear is that this is the hardest one to learn, right? But we don't do this for nothing. I'm not suggesting you learn a framework for nothing. I think there's an upside, and I think that upside is productivity. Again, this graph is totally unscientific, but it is what I strongly believe to be true. I believe that some things are worth learning, and that if you put in the effort up front, eventually it'll allow you to be faster in the end. Now that might not be always like so obvious, because again, like just dropping a jQuery selector into a page seems really simple to solve many problems. But as your application grows in complexity and you have all these endpoints and nothing makes sense, you don't know where things go, sometimes even if it's more work to add that feature, it's less work overall, because it's less work that you're finding, you know, spending time squashing bugs or going through your code base or bothering your coworkers. So I think when you get to the end of that graph over there, like the subtleties between Angular and Ember aren't as obvious, because they're actually both, they probably have more in common than they are different. And I think that the main difference when I try to illustrate this to other people is a fantastic quote I heard from Yehuda himself, which is that Ember has guardrails. So Ember as a framework makes it hard to do things that the framework doesn't want you to do. And some people feel that this is like fighting the framework. And that's a feeling as a developer you don't really want to have. You don't want to feel like you're driving a car and you're about to take that car off the road, right? Like, or, sorry, I meant to say that you don't want to feel like you're grinding into a guardrail or something like that. But that guardrail exists. I mean, there are certain kinds of applications where, like, let's say your application was similar to an off-road Jeep or something like that. A guardrail would get in the way, and you think that's really annoying. But most of the time, if you believe that you're not a special snowflake, you're going to want that in place. You're going to want the framework to encourage you to do the right thing wherever possible. Having said that, I think this is like largely a philosophical thing. If you're the kind of developer who likes making up your own conventions and establishing your own rules, something like Angular or Backbone might be much better suited to you, because they're not going to force you to do something their way. They're going to allow you to build your own conventions. And I've actually seen many successful companies that have used Angular, for example, and they've been like, well, within our company, we built our own guardrails. And they're just not quite the same, but it fits what we're trying to do, and that works really well. I think the difference is that out of the box, in an Ember application, you know where the guardrails are. And I think that is a different kind of productivity. One question I often ask people who use Backbone or something like that is, if you were to leave one company and start a job at another one and open your code base, would you know where the files are? Would you know how things are laid out? And usually, when you're building your own set of conventions, the answer is no. So there's a learning period involved. So there's a productivity boost there, I think, with an Ember application that doesn't have that problem. Because when you go to another Ember project, things are laid out exactly as you expect. So what did Discourse learn from this? If we learned from Ember in the beginning that structure is important, what did we learn about complexity? And I think what we learned was that it's okay to have a complex stack. This is actually Discourse's stack right here. We use Postgres as our database. We use Reddit for transient data and things like our message queue and for things like rate limiting. I mentioned we use Ruby on Rails on the server side, Ember.js on the front side. I mean, we use plain JavaScript for some things. Sidekick is an awesome queue if you've ever used it, and we use Ruby. So this is actually a lot to ask. Like, let's say you just graduated from school, and in school you just used Java. And then you were like, I want to contribute to the Discourse project. Well, you don't necessarily have to know all those things, but you're probably, to do a feature of any size or like that it's not like a trivial change, you're probably going to have to know this. And that's a lot to ask. I mean, anytime you introduce something like that, there is a cost. And I think what we learned is that that's okay as long as you're getting value from that cost. If these tools allow us to be productive, then they're worth having. So I'm going to talk a bit about the future. And I think the best way to talk about the future is to look at the past first. So this is a picture of one of the oldest communities on the internet called the Straight Dope. And that's their forum in 1999, and that's the forum in 2014. I don't know about you guys, like it is a little different, but I think those things are largely the same. And it's really interesting to think of, like, can you think of any other kind of software on the internet that looks the same 15 years later? Like, everything else has been vastly changed. So this is one thing that we really wanted to address before. So Ember describes itself as a framework for creating ambitious web applications. And well, like, what does ambitious mean? I mean, like, yeah, it's a buzzword. But I think what they're trying to establish, and this is how I understand it, is that we shouldn't be thinking of applications as, you know, taking exactly what exists today and converting it to Ember. Or like, this is what a web application is. It's a series of links and you click on them and that's all. What they're actually saying is, like, what kind of applications could you build if you weren't stuck to the old way of doing things? What if you could dynamically update things on the screen and you could have bindings and things would automatically work? What if you could create reusable components? What if you can do a lot of things? There's been a lot of talk of progressive enhancement in the web community. And progressive enhancement is great for many kinds of sites, in particular content sites. But it doesn't work. It doesn't fully work unless you limit the applications you can build. So the example that I often think of is, like, if you're going to build Photoshop in a browser, how would you progressively enhance that? Like, how could you start with no JavaScript and end up with Photoshop? But Ember is there for applications on that end of the spectrum, where you want to build something highly interactive. But Ember itself is also very forward-thinking. So I don't know if you guys are familiar with this, but the next version of JavaScript is being developed under the name ES6, or ECMAScript 6. It's the standard that will become JavaScript 6. And Ember has been, like, a crazy early adopter of this. Right now, if you're getting started with Ember, you often download the Ember app kit. And it has ES6 modules built in today. This is, like, I can't express enough how important this is in the Ember community. So basically, they're like, if you're not building an ES6 Ember application, like, you're behind the curve. Like, this is the way it should be done. And the interesting thing about this is that ES6 modules aren't natively supported in browsers. So why would you tell people this is the way to do things? But the answer is they use a transpiler, which is a really awesome piece of technology that takes your ES6 code and converts it to JavaScript that you can run today. So you get all the advantages of being able to lay your stuff out for the future, but compatibility. And then when the browsers finally catch up, you'll be able to stop transpiling and things will just work. I mean, Ajax has been huge, I think, ever since Google launched Gmail. And but the asynchronous part of it is really hard. JavaScript is a really good language for dealing with this due to its functional nature. But it's often really hard to deal with callback hell, as it's called, so like nesting many callbacks. So from day one, Ember met day one promises. And I don't know if you guys have used promises, but they're really awesome. And they're basically a construct that allows you to return a kind of promise object from your asynchronous functions and chain them and deal with things like catching errors and wrapping asynchronous behavior that then triggers other asynchronous behavior with like the same way of managing flow. They're fantastic. And like I said, they're built into Ember. They're such that if you use Ember's router and you request a URL like user/equals_route, if that route returns a promise, their router is smart enough to pause on that and wait for that promise to fulfill. So it makes your code really easy to write, and it's super awesome. And like ES6, it's forward-thinking. Promises A is currently supported, I think, in one of the Chrome builds. But for now, it's really easy to just drop in a library. Ember includes one out of the box, RSVP.js. But so again, you don't have to wait. And this gets into the whole idea of the extensible web. So the extensible web manifesto, basically the idea that in the past, the time frame between proposing a feature that would make it into a web browser and being able to use that feature has been too long. And one of the reasons is things like legacy browsers like IE6 and stuff like that. But it's also just really hard, I think, for a bunch of people to sit in a room and come up with a standard and get it right the first time. And what often happens is they come up with some ambiguity, and then the multiple browser vendors will all implement it slightly differently. And we've had to rely on things like jQuery and other syntactic sugars and tie it all together in the same way. The Web Manifesto is the idea that this hasn't worked out for us historically. So what we'd like browser vendors to do instead is expose low-level APIs and then build interfaces to JavaScript. So I think the promises is a really good example of this, is that we can make do with that today. We can build the standard today. People can start using it. We can and then use it in production, which is, I think, where you get the majority of the bugs and the issues with things. And then once it's ready, then we can then replace those JavaScript implementations with native implementations that perform a lot better. So this is a really great thing. All the core members of Ember have signed this manifesto. So again, how does that apply to Discourse? Well, if it was always our mission to bring forums into the current era, it's probably better actually that we don't build software for today, or build like a web application as an open source project works today. We tried to bet on the future, and I think that is a really awesome way of doing things. Because the truth is, like, almost all software is obsolete the second you write it. There's just like some new way. We're always learning as software developers new ways to do things, new ways to solve problems. However, I think if you bet slightly ahead of the curve and you do it using the best knowledge that you have, you can build an application that will last longer. And the key here is being able to maintain it in an easy or a consistent way. And I think a framework like Ember can help a lot. But if there's one thing like I want you to take away from this presentation is that learning isn't always easy. I mean, there's many things we did in life that, like learning to ride a bike, for example. I know I fell many times when I was learning. It was extremely painful. And if I'd been like, well, this isn't worth it, then I would have never learned one of the greatest joys, which is cycling. I think that due to time constraints and whatever, like there's this appeal of technologies that just sell themselves as like, look how simple it is. The simplest solution is always the best, and you ain't gonna need all that stuff. I fundamentally disagree. I think some things really are taking the time worth learning, and I think you'll be more productive and a better developer. So that's my presentation. It didn't delve too far into code, but I wanted to give you guys an idea of like JavaScript and Discourse, Ember.js and Discourse, and philosophically where they stand and how they interact with each other. But I love talking technical stuff, so if anybody has any questions, I can talk about any of those things that I did in detail, or you can come and see me afterwards. Does anybody? Do we have any questions? Any calls?
What are some of the, so you talk about a lot of things that you like about Ember. What are some of the things that you think need to change, or that you feel that most developers feel that Ember needs to change right now?
Well, I still think it's too hard to learn. think I just talked about that, but I think that's still the fundamental most difficult thing, is that even though the guides have come a really long way, it's still taking people that I respect, developers I trust, a lot longer to pick up some of the concepts that it should. I think that's a problem. I think historically, before version 1, there was some problems with it changing the core APIs very much. Like the router went through some major revisions. Discourse rode that wave, and it was at times very difficult. Also, I think to compare it to Angular, Angular did one thing well from day one, that's testing. Ember's testing story is now very good, but it took them a really long time to get there. And I think that was probably a major mistake. What else?
So I'm working with Angular.js on a large project, but philosophically I'm with you. We chose Rails for our backend. I'm used to that. I like the investment. I haven't dug into Ember. I'm wondering if you could take us through one of the things that would be really helpful that it does in terms of structure. So I'm trying to map in my head what will we gain by gaining that Ember structure.
Well, one thing I think Ember does really well is it puts URLs first. I don't know if you guys have heard the news, but I was just saying earlier, I'm infuriated that there's a new version of Chrome out there that hides the URL. I think the URL is one of the most important building blocks of the web. Like, I like my phone, I like my smartphone, I like that I have all these fancy little apps, but we've taken a step back in ways that it's really difficult to share things. Like, how can I say, oh, look at what I'm looking at? Like, that's actually that was a solved problem. That was something that was easy, and it's now hard. I think Ember, more than any of the other frameworks, forces you to think in terms of URLs first. Angular does have a good router. I think that their built-in one is less sophisticated than Ember's in some ways. For example, nesting.
We're using the UI router.
UI router is much better. Like I said, Ember's router is asynchronous through and through, so that it demands that if you're talking across the wire by Ajax, it knows to pause, it knows to show error states, loading states. You can do if you have a user route / equal route / preferences, it's smart enough to just render the sub outlet. It's very, very sophisticated. But the core is that it makes you before I sit down and design a new feature, I generally think, what is the URL going to look like? And I think that's something that Angular doesn't do very well, at least without something like UI router. And that's because the web was built on URLs, and we should embrace that. You should, in my opinion, build an application such that if you refresh any page at any given state, it should more or less look exactly as it did before you. And I think a lot of those other frameworks encourage people to make really dynamic things like that, but when you refresh, it's like, oh, I've lost all my state, where'd it go?
Have you had any experience with writing a translation layer for Ember data to a different backend? Have you touched on that at all?
I am not the right person to ask about Ember data. We don't, Discourse, when we started Discourse, the Ember data webpage, it was a much earlier version, and it was not suitable for production use. So that really scared me. So what we ended up doing was writing just standard Ajax requests for everything. And I think so far it's worked pretty well for us. We haven't had any major problems. Ember data is for those who don't know, it's an ORM layer JavaScript. And it turns out that that is a way harder problem than an ORM layer is on the server side. Things like relations, super hard to do. And they tried to do it in a totally agnostic way, so that it would be if you're talking to MongoDB or if you're talking to a RESTful API. So I think they had some major problems with it in the early days. Ember data is now close to, having said that, it's very close to 1.0 now. And I think they have a totally different philosophy, which is you kind of bring your own adapter, which I think is what your question is about. So I don't have experience with it, but I know it's come a long way, and it's a lot easier than it used to be. And I know a lot of people who I used to hear were constantly having issues with it, are now saying it's now really good. But yeah, I can tell you someone else knows.
Yeah.
What's using an IDE with that framework? So how good are the semantic rules? And does the IDE have to have special support in it? Or can it interpret it well enough just by having good JavaScript semantics rules? And follow up from that, does it stick close to the original JavaScript? And is it one of those frameworks that modifies the prototype of the JavaScript object so much that I don't feel like I'm using the JavaScript language anymore? I'm in a totally different language.
I think that's two good questions. I think I'm trying to. So the first one was, I hope I heard you correctly. Is that do you need an IDE, or how good is the IDE support for it? How well is it supported? Well, when you write Ember, you're writing just JavaScript. I use Vim, but I used to use Sublime Text. I'm a fan of like those lighter weight IDEs. I'm not sure if you're like a fan of like a heavy IDE. I'm not sure if any include like excellent Ember support right now. Your mileage may vary in that thing, but you certainly don't need it. I think, especially if you stick to ES6 modules, like if you're keeping each file dealing with one thing, you don't often have to cross-reference things or enter a lot of boilerplate. I think it's pretty simple to manage. And the second question is, well, how much does Ember code look like JavaScript? How does it modify function prototypes? Ember does modify function prototypes, but you don't have to use them. So the standard example for this is computer properties. If you make an object, for example, a good example of a computer property is like a full name property of an object that you're building. And a full name property is computed based on the first and last name. So the usefulness of this is you can tell Ember full name has a dependency on first name, it has a dependency on last name, and then in your templates you just say full name. And if either one of those things changes, it's smart enough to only update what did change. But the standard way in Ember to create those is by using something that modifies function prototypes. So in the end of your function, you add a period property. You don't have to do that. I've yet to see a project that doesn't do that, but you can just as easily call the ember.computed macro yourself rather than using that. I'm not sure if there's a way to tell it to not insert those into the function prototypes. That's a good question. I suspect you can do it. I haven't seen it done. But in my opinion, it does look like JavaScript. Ember does come with its own object model, but it also works really well with plain old JavaScript objects. It's just you lose some of the fancy binding capabilities if you have collections or nested things or stuff like that. So they do encourage you to use ember.object. But I think it's a pretty simple, lightweight layer on top of things. But yeah, again, like Angular has a nice solution to that you can just use plain objects for everything. But the downside is that they do something called dirty checking, which is very computationally expensive, in that they have to observe objects and check all their properties at the at the end of like an event to see if they've changed and updated the DOM. So that's more expensive than Ember, where you use get or set or the same things, and use their object model. Trade-offs. Okay, perfect. Let's give Rob a So we've got some fresh pizza at the back. We're going to take a 5-minute break while Tony gets set up. And I just want to, I guess, appeal to you. We are looking for interesting speakers for this group, obviously relating around JavaScript. Robin will tell you that sometimes it's just an email in someone's inbox. That's how, and I really appreciate coming out. You know, it was sort of out of the blue. I invited Robin, he came out, and I really appreciate it. But if you know of someone who has an interesting topic, or you yourself could present something interesting, we'd love to have you. So get a hold of us through the Meetup page. So we'll be 5 minutes, and then we'll be back.
The other thing too, those who didn't get points for beer didn't get beer. There's some beer that they can put out there. So please, if you had beer before there, please don't take any of that. Really, I felt bad for people who didn't get beer before we had
Yeah, so we are getting close to the cutoff point. So if you want something, beeline it there now. So. My wife and my dad were together for Christmas and had an artist. It's a lot of fun. I haven't gone crazy, but it's a great experience. And then we're also right there.
Oh, yeah. There were disconnections.
Okay, so we're going to get started with the second half. If you want to have a seat. Can we do announcements actually? We're going to do it right now. Like, let people do announcements. You want me to? Okay, so we always do a little section where we have announcements from the crowd. So if you have an announcement, no matter what it is, you have work, you're looking for work, you have a project that you're interested in sharing with people, or you've got anything else, we're going to give you an opportunity there. But first I wanted to mention our sponsor, because the event goes off a lot better with a sponsor. So our sponsor is Wakanda. It's a full JavaScript stack, so if you're interested in JavaScript and building business applications, it'd be a great thing for you to check out. There's a free and open source version, and that's who's sponsoring and has been sponsoring us since the beginning. So I guess with that, I know we've got one announcement, but if you got an announcement, just put up your hand and we'll get to you. So go ahead.
So you guys might have heard of Famous. It's a JavaScript library that's just kind of recently been launched, and it's for building kind of really fast performance JavaScript apps, I guess. And I'm going to be running a workshop at Communitech on May 22nd coming up about building with Famous. And because I think it's a really exciting technology, and I've been investing a lot into learning about it for the last couple of months. And yeah, I'm looking forward to sharing some about it. And if you haven't seen it, then I would definitely recommend looking up Famous, because you might see some things built with JavaScript that you haven't seen before. Because I think that's where it's gonna go. It's on May 22nd from 1 until 4. That's a Thursday, and the cost will be around $50, and you can register on the Communitech website. Thanks.
So if you could do me a favor, post that on our Meetup page,
Sure.
the particulars, and then we'll know where to go. Anyone else? I guess Eric.
Before I say mine, can we just give a round of applause for Greg and for Wakanda for bringing this up together? Yeah, so I work at Method. We're a startup here in Kitchener. We're actually like a minute away from here. Yeah, and we are looking for a front-end JavaScript guru in particular, but really anyone who is very talented with JavaScript, we would love to talk to you. We would love to interview you. Yeah, we're definitely like if you are excited, if you're an ambitious person, if you're a very friendly person too, because we want you to fit in the team, and we are a very friendly team. We are a very energetic team. Definitely come talk to me, or you can talk to Hongwei or anyone from our team. Anyone who says they're from Method, you can hit us up. I'm Eric at Method.ca. That's ERICK at Method.ca. I think you can also hit up. I think it's contact@Method.ca. Yeah, and just send us your resume, and we'd love to talk to you. Anybody else?
So I'm Chris. I'm the founder of Happenate, also the developer for it. Like you've heard in the question, we're using Angular.js. We really love creating beautiful tech, like beautiful user experience, but also beautifully designed stuff. CS grad, so that comes with the territory. We're looking for a dev to join our team. You'll be one of the first devs in a small startup inside the Velocity Garage, so that kind of helps you filter personality type. Do you like being early on in a project like that? We're in the Velocity Garage. It's probably front-end heavy, although we're Rails on the back end. You'd probably be touching full stack. If you're interested in that, talk to me. Look for me, or email info@happenate, HAPPENATE, info@happenate, and love to talk to you. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Ian. I've got an open source project I've been working on for a while. It's called Chloroform. It's on GitHub. It's form validation on the client side that is intended to suck a little less than everything else. I've been using it in production for 2 years. It's pretty stable, but it's missing a lot of pieces. And all I want is for people to try it out, maybe send in a pull request, and work on it. That's all. It's called Chloroform. It's on GitHub. Just look for it.
Awesome. Anybody else?
Hey, I'm James from homefed.co. If you like to post pictures of your food on Twitter, I want to eat it. Basically, that's the premise of HomeFed. We're building an app. It's built in Node, amongst other things. I'm personally a design background, industrial design, but we have some great technical on our team looking to build that up. So if you're interested in food and tech, give me email me, james@homefed.co, or come talk to me. Thanks.
Anyone else? Okay, I think we're good. One other thing. Another thing I wanted to mention, obviously this group is growing quite a bit. So we're obviously looking for sponsors at any point. So if you want to get a shout out during our meetings, yeah, we'd definitely love to talk to you. So you can hit us up on the Meetup page. You can talk to me, or you can talk to Greg, or you can talk to James, who I'm not sure what happened to James tonight. You can make it. Okay, all right. But yeah, so if you can sponsor events, or if you know someone who can sponsor events, we definitely appreciate the help. Oh, and give it out to Tony. So you can just give us a big round of applause for Tony. All right, Tony, go.
so before we begin, can everyone hear me? Testing, 1, 2, 3. Can everyone hear me? Cool. Yep. Right. So my presentation is on Bookmarklets. Just a little background. I'm not really a full-time web developer or whatnot. When I was in school, I went into an office, did tech support for a couple of years. And that's how I started getting into office programming, automation, and whatnot. And that's how I stumbled across Bookmarklets. Short story was I was just trying to automate something, just automate key clicks, keyboard clusters, and whatnot. So, hey, launch up my screen, they get really fast and whatnot. And then, can you guys hear me?
A little, just speak right up because it's a loud room. But yeah, it's good.
Okay, so basically, there was a language called AutoHotkey, and just trying to automate everything I could, like press a button, walk away from the computer, watch it, screen go crazy, no one touch it, and it's all good. So eventually, we're trying to automate the browser itself, and that's where we came across some smart people who came about Bookmarklets. Basically, so I think it's I'm not like I don't know. I'm not the guru on JavaScript itself, but I've been using it for at least about 5 years. I think it's really cool how JavaScript's an interesting language because everything is all just object itself. Like you have class, you have everything. But if you want to just dig down right into the deep of it, it's just an object itself. And that's where with like just the basic JavaScript skills, you can make bookmarklets. With basic skills, you can poke around in anything on the web page itself. It's all open. So that's kind of just what this presentation is about. So who is this for? Pretty much if you don't know what Bookmarklet is, I'll tell you in this presentation. If you don't know how to program in JavaScript, which I didn't, this is a very fun way to start programming in JavaScript because you actually get results fast. You're not trying to write 10 pages of code or whatnot, trying to make a hello world or a web page. But like one line, you can do something to the web page. But like 2 lines, you can do something really cool. You can start screwing around with web page, pull data out of it. So you can do a lot of stuff with just a couple lines of JavaScript, just because of the way it is. Like I didn't know how JavaScript was itself, and it's like with just one line, dot get element by tag name itself, you can pretty much hook onto any object itself for any values you want, or just start changing things on the fly itself. So that's sort of the gist of it itself. So what is it? It's like I said, it's just JavaScript itself. It's JavaScript that's just run into the browser itself. It runs on the same scope as a web page. So, for example, like on certain web pages, you have different sandboxes and whatnot. If you open up a splash pad on the Firefox itself and you access new code, it's not happening on the web page. It's happening on the sandbox on the side. Well, that's your code is as the person who made the website jammed their code into their page itself. You're injecting your code into the web page itself. So that's where you can do some cool stuff with it. You can touch anything on the web page, you do stuff with it. You're not trying to poke around into it. You're actually changing the web page on the fly itself temporarily. So that's where you can do some very cool stuff with it. And I'm just going to switch back and forth since it's just easier itself. So for example, if I just type Java, JavaScript. Like that's it. That's all you need to do something itself. You're just typing JavaScript into the address bar itself, and it's executing on the page as if it's not being loaded itself. Export to your window and you can't copy and paste it. You can pretty much Like once the data is in the web page, it's all yours to play around with itself. What you can do with it, you can pretty much override anything, like any function they hooked onto it. You can go back in and change it because you have your right to modify the web page temporarily on your side itself, on the client side. So that's what I find very cool about it, because it's a great way to learn about JavaScript, and it's a great way to hook onto it. And it's on your control, basically. You can do what you want to a web page. Like one of the fun things is like you can see how it works. Like it's all like the way a web page works is it's just the document.object, window.document, CSS, and JavaScript itself. But I mean, if you just know how the document works, anything that's on the web page, you can just grab into itself. It's not like it's not hurting itself. It's all objects with there and the object itself. But once you know what tag is and when you can get through it, you can pretty much just grab anything you want, changing it on the fly itself. So the short story is how to make a bookmark that I showed you. Just like the JavaScript protocol. It was made around when Netscape did. They pioneered it then. And it's also called favorites because at the terminal just you had a favorite for, and the idea was just to install an app. There was no app store. You just drag your app to the favorite for. So they would call it app. It's an app. It's a JavaScript app. You just drag. You just install an app. So this was how people were phrasing it at the time. One of the things is when you write your code, you don't want to put any lines that break it. You don't want to return a value. If you return a value, then your web page will just go blank. I might show you an example. So let's say one of the things was with Netscape about back was the browser was actually meant so you could view a web page, but the browser was meant so you could create a web page as well. But as things went further, that ability just sort of disappeared. So for example, if I go Java, if I just go like this, it just disappears the whole page because one of the functions is returning a value. So that's one of the things you want to do on the void itself. So, and you cannot do anything you do over bookmark just by refreshing the web page itself. So if I make sure the script doesn't actually return any value itself, I just ran content itself. So one of the cool things is you can start changing on the fly. That's just the cool properties of IE itself. It's not fixed or whatnot, but that was long ago the browser was meant to edit HTML, so you could start doing stuff, right? You can just, and that's just by changing one flag, like just changing design content mode to true, and then you can start doing stuff itself. And then after you make your code, you can just bookmark it, and then every time you click on that bookmarklet, it would run that script itself. Yeah, so the short story is you can just do JavaScript code, you can do alerts, and you can post stuff out of it. You can modify stuff, and you can launch a new web page. And the things with like older versions of IE was that you had a 500 character limit on your bookmarks. So you can actually do much complex stuff. We had to keep your code short. With later versions itself, you had a 2,000 character limit on how much code you could actually fit in the address book before it starts breaking. With Chrome itself, the versions that tested it with about 200K of characters, and it works just fine. So, but that's just browser specific itself. So one of the things you could do is you could just do a code, insert a script tag, and then just make a reference to your JS file. So that's how you could start building a complex bookmarklets itself. So that's how to make a bookmarklets. One of the problems is why aren't there more bookmarklets? Why? If there's so many ways to build them, what's the issue with it? Turns out there's a lot of issues with bookmarklets. It's because JavaScript is so open, you also have a cross-site scripting, you have hackers and whatnot. Like the web was built so you can have all these documents pass back and forth, and that's not a big issue. But once you start like doing security and whatnot, because the language is so open, yeah, so many stuff that can stop you. So one of the things is HTTP and HTTPS, you had a cross-site scripting itself. So like with iframes, if you type one page, Google and whatnot, you can have another web page hosting that iframe, and you run your JavaScript code to modify that frame. Because you had so much access to it, you could grab the credentials, grab their cookies and whatnot, and then just hijack the session and do stuff, make them log on to their own web page and whatnot. So since then, browsers started disabling a lot of stuff to do with JavaScript itself. So like with Flask origin was security model itself. One of the things was if you have a web page from Google or whatnot, if you try to insert a script tag from, let's say, not Google, it would actually disable that script just because it could be just a malicious cross-site scripting attempt, attempting to just redirect you or do something malicious to the site itself. There's a lot of issues with HTTP and HTTPS resources. So if you hosted your JS script on HTTP server, you try to run Google, which is on HTTPS, that'll block itself because Google doesn't like, or the browser doesn't like resources mix and match. You'll actually get a lot of errors itself. It doesn't trust it. Different browsers have their own implementation. So if you're trying to automate something in IE and you're trying to automate something in Firefox, you'll just have different keywords itself or different things itself. The other thing is pop-up blockers. So like one of the things you can do with Bookmarklets is you can launch web pages and have that page extract data from the original page. So you can just launch a bookmarklet or scripts from the original, pull data from the original web page and print it out on a new web page, and then that's against the code itself. One of the problems is different browsers have their own different ways of disabling pop-ups, just because it's the technology used by regular JavaScript and whatnot. And certain browsers, if the code is launching a pop-up, the browser just can't stop it, period. So if you want to actually allow it, you would have to say, yes, I'm going to allow it. But then by the time that happens, your bookmarklet already stopped itself, so it's not going to get running again itself. So that's one of the annoying things. Some other bookmarklets where you actually have to click for your script to actually launch itself, but some web pages don't allow you to click itself, or they the other thing is because you can just copy JavaScript code into Jasper, some people just do it blindly. That will cause user error issues. Like you copy and paste bad JavaScript into your browser, and that's why you send your password to evilset.com. But in the guise of protecting users, this is why you can't do something like just typing something like. So like, for example, if you go into browsers and whatnot, you just copy and paste that. What happens is the JavaScript in front of it actually gets stripped off. So that's not going to run itself. The other thing is that you just do if you paste it after the JavaScript itself, it's also trimmed off. And I was working on this one itself, but other browsers like Firefox, they actually disable this completely. So you actually have to put it inside the bookmark before it will even run in period. And then IE, they sort of allow it unless it's IE 9, which it depends on your security settings itself. So I guess I'm just going to show some of the itself. There's a lot of stuff more complicated than what I've done itself. If you Google trim bookmarklets, you'll find other stuff. But for example, one of the cool things I really like is this bookmarklet. You just look through all the variables itself. So when given any web page, you can see all the variables from the web page itself and it goes down. So like, let's say we're looking at any web page itself. You could look at Windows itself and see what variables there are there itself. You can go back in and say, hey, I want to take a peek through itself. What's inside window dots? Okay, so that isn't working, but it's supposed to. The idea was so you can loop through variables and all your variables on the web page, and then dynamically loop through all those variables. So the idea is like when you're going through any web page, you could just stop and like, hey, I want to take a peek at something or whatnot. We also got like there's also a bunch of other cool stuff. So like you could view CSS on itself, and there are actually cool bookmarklets on. Let's say. So like there are functions to like disable all CSS, and then you can see what web page would look like if we had no CSS altogether, and then you can just see going back and forth itself, and that's where I'm starting to learn just how CSS works itself. This is all just you can. This is a bookmark that helps test CSS itself. One of the other bookmarklets that I'm testing on itself is just. This is a function. What it does is it launches a new window, and this window hooks onto all functions on the previous window itself. So I can see all functions of what it's calling itself, and I can see now what happened. It's not working perfectly right now because my function is just sort of breaking something in JavaScript itself. So what's supposed to happen is it follows my finite state machine into some states itself. But yeah, with the script itself, it launches a new window, and what's cool is you can pass window between the windows.opener back onto a new window and back and forth. So once you launch a new window, if they keep a reference of each other, you can actually launch. You can hook on your own functions to the other web page and have it do stuff on a new page itself. So I mean, that's the gist of bookmarklets itself. It was more useful like 5 years back. Now there's a lot of new ads on itself. So like there's iMacros, which lets you automate stuff itself, and there's Grease Monkey, which lets you inject JavaScript into a page before and whatnot. Internet Explorer actually has a bunch of decent APIs if you want to just do pure automation itself. Then there's web drivers and proxy servers. We can actually modify a web page on the fly and inject JavaScript itself. That's about the gist of my presentation. If you have any questions on Bookmarklets itself.
So you mentioned like bookmarks are cool. I also use the paper one, which is really cool. But like other than for not from the perspective of a developer, like just for normal people, non-geek people.
Yeah.
What good are they?
So like when I was at like I said, I wasn't a developer when I was in the office for 5 years. I was using it to automate my stuff. So for example, let's say I'm going to like where I was working at Discourse, right? And you only have so much time to do stuff. So like when I'm going to a web page, then like every time I email someone, hey, check out this article. What I would do is just go to a web page, like a knowledge-based article itself, run a bookmark. That's bookmark. Grab the title, grab the URL, grab everything about it, and nice little format. So you can just copy and paste that to an email to someone else. You can actually use it. Like there are bookmarklets for auto liking, let's say Facebook likes. So what I would do is he'll loop through every single like link itself, and wait a second, click on a link, wait 1 second, click on a link. What was before was someone made a bookmark that you could auto like 20 likes at once, but then Facebook made it so if you liked something more than once, 1 per second, they will block you and shut down your account temporarily. So that was it itself. You can use it for like pulling data off Google and whatnot. Like there's a lot of web pages where you have a JSON result itself. If you go straight to JSON, you can actually run bookmarklets to validate JSON, convert it to something. So like a lot of people are doing like data work, Excel work and whatnot. You need to copy stuff into Excel and whatnot. A lot of the time, the web isn't very formatted itself. You can just run a quick bookmarklet, format that web page into something you can just easily copy and paste it itself right away itself. That's about the general gist of it. It's meant for like simple automation itself. Once you get really complex, then that's what makes sense if you're doing iMac or whatnot. But the way I see it, it's more like keeping a bunch of bookmarks as simple tools itself. So if you're hooking into something, you can just grab the stuff off of that itself.
And just to answer that question, a couple of things I use with Bookmarklets. Delicious, which is not a recipe site, it's a way to keep track of bookmarks. So you go to the site, you use the bookmarklet, it pops up, says which, how do you want to tag this, saves it to your Delicious account if you're logged in already. It's just way easier than copy and paste it, go over to Delicious, go ahead and paste it in there. It's just very quick and super application. And another one, before I discovered LastPass, Super Pass Gen is what it's called. The bookmarklet, when you click on it, pops up a little window, says type in your master password, and then it takes the URL, mixes it with the master password, and produces a password per site. So you can have a different password on every single site. You just click on the bookmarklet, generate your hash, whatever that's going to be, and then paste the password field on that page roll right there, ready to go.
So is that responsible?
It's not super safe, but it's safer than some other options, like using the same password.
Cool.
Next, Tony. Something I want to mention.
It runs in the context of web page. Yeah. Web page can intersect.
Okay, so that's the presentations for today. As you saw, all the presentations that we've had so far are always volunteers, and we're always looking for new volunteers to give presentations. And really, it's anything related to JavaScript. It can be front end, it can be back end, it can be on hardware, because we haven't seen that. Really, anything. It could be a library, it could be just a philosophy you have about how you code things in JavaScript. Anything that you think will interest the group, please come talk to me or come talk to Greg.
If you're willing to pay for speakers, I've got a topic.
Yeah.
I'm just kidding.
Okay.
How to make money.
Yeah. Yeah.
But thanks everyone for coming. And you're welcome to stick around and chat with everyone. We're obviously not going to kick you out for this stuff. So thank you everyone.